Okay, guys, so welcome to my last presentation for this semester. After this, I promise I will not be saying a word. You all will be taking over and teaching the class. Today, we're going to be looking at chapter 3 of the main text, and that is the chapter that is going to detail. Let me just arrange this so that we can see what's going on. That is the chapter that is going to detail the relational leadership model. So this chapter is designed for us to take a deeper look at the relational leadership model as a model for you to consider in the development of your leadership potential or your leadership style and development moving forward from here. So the invitation will be for you to look at what this theory is saying and consider it in your own personal leadership development. Okay, so let's start with some basic background information. From the premise of the relational leadership model is that leadership has to do with relationships, and we can't pull the relationship out of the leadership, so that the nature of your relationship is going to be an important element that we're going to look at. And the second element that we're going to be paying attention to is that leadership is dependent upon the context in which you are establishing those relationships. So if you think about it, in the job place, there are different types of relationships you might develop in as opposed to a classroom situation. And if you're in a leadership position at the job as opposed to a leadership position in a classroom, there are two different sets of tools that you might want to utilize to facilitate your activities as a leader or follower in that context. And similarly, it kind of guides what is going to be taking place across the board. All right. So the context has helps to determine the nature of the relationships that you're likely to develop. But there's some general rules across the board that we will be following. If we remember from the first chapter that I presented, the relational leadership model defines leadership as a relational and ethical process of people together attempting to accomplish positive change. Now, we should remember that from before, but the focal point, of course, is leadership is about the relationship and it's bound by ethical processes. And we are specifically looking at positive change. And that's an important element because how do we determine the change that we're looking at is positive is going to be based upon the ethical values that we hold as the guiding principles through the process that we're looking at. The leadership process or the leadership model has five components that kind of guides us through it. We're going to be looking at the purpose or the vision of the organization, the practice of inclusivity, the empowerment of members within the organization, the ethical values that we're going to hold as being the cornerstone or the guiding principles that govern our behavior together and what we do. And we're going to be doing those four things all will be looked at from or dealt with through a process oriented situation. So those are the five elements that we're going to be looking at across the board. So the quotation here is that the relational leadership model is purposeful and builds commitment towards positive purposes that are inclusive of people and diverse points of view. Let's bring back Ms. Pitt. Points of view empowers those who are involved, is ethical, and recognizes all four of these elements are accomplished by being process oriented. All right. So the process orientation is sort of an overarching principle. So as we can see in this model here, taken from the main text, you'd see that the purpose or goal of the organization is central. Um, okay, hold on. Ms. Mohammed, welcome.
Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon there. Welcome aboard. Um, all right. So as I said, as I was saying before. Right. So the purpose is central to the organization or to your leadership activities or to this model. And inclusivity and empowerment are two of the processes that support that. And of course, you're utilizing the ethical principles as a anchoring principle. And then everything is going to utilize a process approach. Now, we'll get to process by itself. So we'll start to discuss that from moving on. Well, we'll understand hopefully what process is oriented about. All right. Generally, the model is not seeking to describe what's happening now, but it is seeking an alternative that people can aspire towards. So there are some things that we're going to be looking at that we're going to be asking people who may be in leadership roles already to evaluate and probably change what is happening. This program was developed. This specific program that we've developed here came up after 2010, after we had the financial failures that took place in the US market and the local market here. And the reason why that happened was because of a sort of um, greed based approach to business activities and profiteering, which kind of led to a lot of unethical behaviors that was taking place in and around us by people in key positions in both the international and our local and regional. It indicates us there was a need for us to develop a program that looked at leadership from a different perspective and connected the ethical values that we're identifying here. So those five elements that we're going to be discussing is determined. The, the concept of leadership is not something that's old. It's just that the way in which we're approaching it needs to be refreshed. Because if you look at the leaders around us, how many of us are absolutely happy with what we see in leadership around us? Anybody? Let's just take it back there to 1 second. Keela, what do you think? Do you like the quality of leadership you see around you?
No, sir.
What aspects are displeasing to you?
So, like, for example, like the government sector, the security sector, how we have like a lot of crime. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not pleased with the leadership in the national security sector.
Right. And what are they doing that is so displeasing to you? And anybody else could chime in. They can add their 2 cents, so to speak. Janie, how about you? Or
Uh,
Gabrielle? Uh-huh. Go ahead, Janie.
no, so I was gonna say I don't really have anything relevant to say at the moment.
You didn't show? Okay. All right. What about Gabrielle? Or Devika? Guys, I'm trying to get you all to get involved in the discussion. Or else it's going to be a boring.
Also, I believe that not enough is being done to help reduce the amount of crime because I don't think we could stop it on like the first day, but you have to start somewhere, and I feel like we're not starting. I think
Okay.
that's part leadership kind of fall behind like it fall.
Uh, so, what would you like to see?
Well, I feel like we focusing well in the crime sector speaking about. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like we're focusing on the wrong things. I'm paying all our resources into the wrong things at the moment. I mean, it's still legal, but we have bigger issues, like in the sense of gangs and stuff. We're not paying all our resources into stopping that.
Uh huh. Okay. So, what would you if you were in a position to change policy? What would you like to see change?
Well, I would. Um, that's a good question. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
sure, but I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I would say probably a curfew. For the time being, because I think during COVID, when we had curfews and stuff, the crime was really, really low. So that would be one thing.
All right. So you think using more restrictive methodologies like, so we do have a state of emergency in existence, but you want to add with that some sort of curfew activity or curfew restrictions. How many
Yeah.
other people feel that she may be right or her
I
position?
agree with person.
Uh huh. Okay. Um, so what kind of curfew would you suggest? What time would we tell people lock all yourself home?
So I would say it would vary on a weekend. So during the week, probably 9, and on a weekend, probably like 11 to like maybe 6. And during the week would be like 9 to like 4, because I know a lot of people from different areas have to go to work and stuff like that.
Uh
So,
huh.
it would vary.
So what about the business that happens at night? What will happen to them?
But I think this is where um a sacrifice has to be made on a show.
Okay. That's fine. Anybody here thinks if we run into a curfew or we start curfews of that nature, would you be directly or indirectly affected by it?
So I think a curfew is a good idea, but also it has, I think it's easy to say just have a curfew, but it have a lot more considerations that need to be made
Such as, come on, stop being
in
so.
terms of like, yeah, we thinking about like, well, I'm gonna say common people, like everyday people committing crime, but also we have to take into consideration that there's also white collar crime and crime in the system that can still take place whether or not there's a curfew.
Yeah, day or night, right? Okay, I
Yeah.
see, Makia, your hand is up. You wanted to add something?
If they have a business in the nighttime, they could have like night passes to
Mm-hmm.
be outside that time.
Okay, that's true. Yes, and how would we qualify for that? I mean, and what criteria would we utilize for that? And the broader question I'm going to throw to you: would a curfew really treat with the root cause of crime?
I was just about to add, say that I don't feel like a curfew is really going to do anything to mitigate crime. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that's a short term solution for something that is much bigger.
Mm-hmm. So, what do you perceive as the key issues that you would want to approach if you were to do away with a curfew? What do you think we need to look at?
This is me personally.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
Feel like most of the crime starts within the community, and I feel like if it is we have programs and after school activities, like little things to get children involved and active so they don't have like all this free time to just kind of fall into the wrong crowd. We more or less like mold them because it
Mm-hmm.
does start at home and it does start within your community. I think that will play a big part in just curving the way that individuals grow and the path that they later choose to take.
True. And would you say there are specific areas of communities we need to address, or is it
Yes, I
generally
do
across the
think
board, everybody?
that there are specific communities that we need to address, and I believe like this was a study a couple years ago with like the way we design buildings. For example, like the housing schemes in Laventille.
Uh huh.
There was a study that says, houses that are built really closely together, and there isn't any greenery, there isn't any parks, it's not easily accessible, that the people in those areas kind of tend to go down a life of crime.
Okay, so there's a causative sort of solution that you're looking at. Um, was there anybody in this class that was doing criminal justice in their degree program? I think I vaguely remember seeing somebody. Maybe I'm not correct in that thing. But yes, I think the issue of crime in our country is not something as that's going to be easy to solve because the causative factors are not being addressed. What I think is happening now is we are addressing the symptoms and we are ignoring huge parts of our society that is dysfunctional across the board. So, all right. So there are lots of things I hope that when we finish looking at this model and by the time we get to the end of the semester, different things that you might want to see from leadership in a general sense across the board. And it doesn't matter if it's government, but also in the school systems, in um, where you work, and ultimately where you will eventually become a leader. I hope that you remember when you get into those positions the some of the things that we're going to be looking at here, and you bring it to your practice in leadership moving in that direction. All right. So there are lots of things that we want to talk about here. So let's start with the first element, which is purpose. How many of you all have um, how many of you have a personal vision for yourself moving forward in the future? Right. So how many of you have been asked this question before? All right. So Christian, you just reached. So let me bring you into the conversation. Do you mind sharing, Christian, your vision of where you see yourself in the future?
The vision of where I see myself in the future.
Yeah.
I
Do you have a
guess
clear idea, or is it just kind of like a vague something?
more vague, more vague really, just because to me life is more like unexpected. You don't know if stuff could happen.
Right.
But but more vague for me would be like, let's say, obviously I want to do accounting, so that I want to become an accountant. That's
Mm-hmm.
and well to start up and well to see if I can restart my business later down the year. I see that
Right.
happening as well.
Okay.
So
So
uh
you're kind of measuring short term versus long term goals. So have you ever come across anybody here, that question where you've gone into an interview and you've been asked, where do you see yourself in 5 years or 10 years? Have you ever had that question asked of you in the past, especially during job search?
Yes, sir.
It's a very popular question in interviews. Why do you think they're
Yes,
asking
sir.
that question?
So
People.
I
Mm-hmm.
want to believe they're asking it to see where your mindset is at.
Uh huh.
Probably to get. I feel like it's a question that you could get to know a lot about somebody by the way they answer it.
So how do you answer, Devika? When they ask
You know,
you, where do you see yourself in 5 years, 10 years? How do
so
you
well,
answer?
I believe it depends on the context. So I would answer it depending on who asks.
Well, I am
So
asking.
well, in a well, in a professional sense, I would say in 5 or 10 years, I would see myself working in my field of radiography.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, in 10 years, I would have my own business, and
Mm-hmm.
I would live a very comfortable lifestyle. I enjoy what I'm doing,
Mm-hmm.
and regardless, if I am currently working, I would also like to continue with my education. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's pretty much it in this
Right.
context.
Right. And any specifics in terms of goals that you have in mind? As you said
Um,
something about a house, I guess living comfortably. What does comfortably mean?
I don't comfortably for me means I don't have to worry about how I pay in bills or
Mm.
things like that. So
Yeah,
that's what I mean by
everybody will want
comfortable.
that. All right. So one of the things that there is a group here, actually the team that is dealing with groups and teams will come across something called the SMART rubric for setting goals. And I'll give all of you all this advice. Goals need to be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time bound. So when you are setting up your goals, they need to have those features at least, because there's another one called smarter, which includes ethically and environmentally sound, and the last R will be resourced. So, but generally, we're looking for your goals to be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. Because having a dream is one thing, but having goals have to be a little more defined, and that is a really important thing. And importantly enough, right now, the kind of goals we're talking about are very specific to you as individuals. And the reason why I'm asking you that is because when you've identified what you want out of life, those things, those goals drive your behavior. So the same thing works in organizations. Purpose influences how an organization does what it does. It is critical in determining your behavior. So, here in the relational leadership model, it's saying purpose will influence the components of being inclusive, empowering, and ethical. It includes others, empowers them to use their leadership and talents, and is ethical in that it benefits others and improves the quality of life generally. That purpose, how do we arrive at that purpose? Now, in your case, you are arriving at your goals and visions based upon your own personal wants and needs and desires. But in organizations, you have two ways in which the vision or purpose of the organization arrives at. It is either, well, the organization is either driven by the vision that it hopes to achieve, or it is driven by the position or the person sitting in the driver's seat, or the leader of the organization. What we hope, however, is that we would prefer that most organizations are vision driven and not positionally driven, meaning that it's not dependent on an individual, specific individual. Because in the absence of that individual, the organization is likely to lose traction because they no longer have that focus. If it is driven or is guided by a purpose, then it's likely to survive the membership that currently exists. Um, and how we arrive at that vision is also going to be another element. This is something you can see happens a lot in family businesses that have, they don't exist anymore because the drive of the business was related to the presence of a particular individual in the organization. So I could think of Amar. I don't know if any of you all are familiar with these organizations that existed in Trinidad before. Amar is one. Um, Kipalanis is another. Um, a couple others. There's John Williams was another one. They are positional because the goals and objectives of those organizations was driven by the key individual that set up the company. And once they passed away, what ended up happening was that the vision was no longer, there was nobody to guide it, and therefore the organization that was left behind became almost rudderless because there was no collective vision that the people who were left behind would focus on in terms of how they were going to go about continuing their existence. Now, interestingly, um, I think last year, um, Helen Bhagwan Singh died. You're familiar with that, right? The organization Bhagwan Singh. Yes, no, you're living in Trinidad,
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
right? So when she died, you have to remember she was pivotal in positioning Bhagwan Singh as one of the leading hardware and hardwares and distribution, steel and lumber distributors in Trinidad and Tobago. So it's going to be interesting to see how an organization that was primarily driven by an individual would transition into a vision driven organization, because the organization is truly a very large organization and set up as a corporation. But understandably so. Of course, she was identified as probably being the richest person in Trinidad and Tobago, right? At least from a legal standpoint. You're all familiar with that, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good.
Yes, sir.
People didn't arrive at those positions just overnight, right? They had to have purpose. So we've met this knowing, being, doing concept before in the first presentation that we talked about. The knowing is about yourself, understanding who you are and what your skills are, and knowing all about yourself. The being part is being aware of how you interact with other people and what you do with them, your ethical value structure. And then, of course, the act of doing would be putting all those things into practice. We're going to be revisiting that again simply because of the relationship it has with the goal and purpose function of the model. All right. The model is going to call for us to put that three-stage process into constant action, because those three components are going to have to take place over and over again for us to constantly learn more, constantly review how your belief structure, which will therefore influence how you act with other people. So, knowing, being, doing cycle is one that you will be constantly asked to reinvent yourself and keep on doing more and more to improve yourself. Because if you think about it from the onset, the knowing part refers primarily to your knowledge, what you understand, your expertise that you've gathered over time. So most of you all here are in the process of widening and improving the knowledge that you have. And of course, the more you do, it in itself, the experience teaches you more. And that therefore adds to your knowledge base. As you move through life, your belief structures and your value systems may change, widen, broaden. And those things will then change the way you behave with people. So, again, you can see this as a never ending process of constant learning. And whereas in the text, it refers to it as a circular activity, though it's circular in nature, I think of it more of a spiraling nature. And I would like to think it is a upward spiraling or outward spiraling um, concept, because each time you go through the process of the knowing, being, doing, it should broaden your perception of things. It should broaden your perception of life, and therefore, every time you make that journey around, you 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 keep on increasing the orbit of your concepts, of your ideas, and you get better and better. Sometimes, however, we could spiral inwards a little bit, especially when we face some major setbacks or loss in life. We have a tendency to kind of stop and wonder, just kind of hold strain for a little while you catch yourself, kind of situation. And we expect that therefore it's not going to be a smooth process, but one that is likely to take us on journeys that we didn't even predict that we would have. And one of the things that happens that causes that is actually when we experience significant loss in life, of people, individuals, relationships, sometimes material loss, losing jobs, losing a home, or losing some sort of large asset. Those things become teachable moments in which it challenges your beliefs, it challenges your behavior, and you want to, you're tempted to do things in a different way. And how you come through that in terms of keeping, without changing your basic humanity, is going to be critical. I don't know if you've ever looked at biographies of criminals. Have any of y'all ever looked at biographies of criminals on television, on that type of stuff? Anybody?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Uh-huh.
Yes, very
Have you
many.
ever? Right. Now, one of the things that you look for is those pivotal moments when somebody. made that switch over to some sort of um, criminal based activity, most times you might be able to find a pivotal point in that person's life that kind of moved them in that direction. Something happened in their time frame where they suddenly became or not suddenly, but transitioned into an alternative lifestyle that is, and when I say alternative lifestyle, that's something outside of the what we consider normal or ethical human behavior or societal behavior into that the influences of the underworld, and generally it's not something good; it's something bad. Making sense? Um, have a look. I mean, use keep this knowing, being, doing concept in mind, and look at some of those sort of docudramas or stories based upon true events, and look at how the characters are portrayed by the director and the writers and stuff, and look at those pivot points that where characters can shift into one direction or the other. What Because people don't just end up in one and behave in a particular way just because they're born that way. Okay, guys. All right. Now Palmer in the textbook likened the knowing, being, doing to head, heart, and practice in the art of teaching or the paradox of teaching. And this is I saw this similarity or this I saw this as being something that is easily seen within the classroom situation, because your head refers to your training and your development, and all the sort of um, qualifications you have, be it in your specialization and in your teacher training and that type of stuff. Your heart has to do with the passion that you feel about it. And those two things, your knowledge and your passion, then begins to find its way in the practice of how you go about. And in, um, if you understand that your knowledge base, the head and the heart, are critical in determining how you practice, I mean, it's something that you can see very quickly. You'll come across those teachers that are inspiring because they have all this knowledge, and they're dying to share that information with their class, and they're trying to find these encouraging and stimulating methodologies to do it. So therefore, their practice is infused by that type of activity. Similarly, unfortunately, some of you all have come across teachers who lack that head and heart. Unfortunately, a lot of the teachers who don't have the heart in particular, they tend to be in what I refer to as critical areas of the system, and that negative practice tends to have negative impact upon the student bodies moving through. And unfortunately, it tends to show itself a lot in the secondary school system, because I hear all these horror stories of people going to class, and they don't want to be there. They're just there because it's a job and I get them the money, and that kind of attitude doesn't transcend itself into inspiring students to try and achieve the best things in life, and to move beyond the limitations of the environment that they're growing up in. All right. So, something I hope that maybe you can see, I hope that none of you here have had a lot of those negative experiences. But even if you've had, use that negative experience to teach yourself that you don't want to be like that. All right? Let's put it that way. Use it as a good, bad example. All right? So, what he's saying, the knowing, being, doing, or the head heart practice elements, is something we have to engage in for to develop our leadership potential. Same way it is required to develop your teaching potential. The knowing, being, doing is something that you're always going to be utilizing to help develop your skill sets, your overall leadership practice. Now, if you think about it, the knowing part is important because we are willing to work with people who prove themselves to be credible, meaning that they they prove themselves to be knowledgeable, experts in a field. we will trust your decision, and we will trust the information that you're feeding to us. And that's what most teachers are supposed to have. They're supposed to be credible people who have this knowledge and expertise to be able to share that information with other people. Students will be willing to listen and take on what they're talking about there. So you have to demonstrate that level of competency, and it has to be something that you as an individual, if you know you feel you lack information, go and fill the gaps, which is continue your learning, and you don't need to only do that learning in the confines of formal academic studies. You can also do this from your own personal investigations, reading and exploring of information outside there. I'm hoping you all have developed a lot of those habits in terms of you want to know something more about something, go and do your own research in it. That's the one thing degree programs are supposed to do. By the time you finish your degree program, you should know how to go about learning about things. All right, that's one of the things. Now, there are four areas of the knowing that we're looking at here, and we've spoken a bit about the technical skills. We've focused on that already. But there are the other soft skills that support that. That's the interpersonal skills, which is really about your communication skills, conceptualization skills, which unfortunately we have to spend a lot more time developing, because creativity is something that is oftentimes suppressed in children as they develop and grow. That part of their creativity is a lot of times kind of quashed. And tactical skills. Those skills are being able to work in groups, negotiate, and find solutions to problems rather than get into arguments and fistfights. Those are things that are the soft skills that all leaders, all people generally need to work with each other. Now, those interpersonal skills and tactical skills are the more critical ones that we need to work on. Now, I don't know if any of you all are familiar, but Professor Julian, who was one of the leading proponents of the development of UTT, he was a petroleum engineer, and he always spoke about. He's passed away now. He always spoke about the biggest issues in the industries was not the technical skills, but the what he referred to at that time, the soft skills that go along with supervising and leading people in those industries. Because the degree programs focus their attention on the development of technical skills and look at the interpersonal skills and the tactical skills as secondary soft filler courses. Now, you'd notice in your degree program, you have a combination of technical courses and other courses that some of you may look upon as being a hindrance to you getting your degree. Let's be honest, how many of you all wanted to do this course, Leadership and Ethics? Silence. Miss Pollard? Ariel?
Yes, sir.
Hmm. Did you want to do this course, or were you told you had to do it?
Well, this is my first year, so I'm still learning how exactly the program works.
Uh-huh.
But when I did see it, I thought it is a very important course for me to take.
Right. So this is your first semester, is it? Or your first
My
year?
second semester, first year.
Right. It's a bit early for this course in your program. What program are you doing, by the way? Management or accounting?
Human resource management.
Right. Human resource management. It's a bit early because this course is best suited for people coming near the end of the associate level set of work. But what about my graphic artist? There are graphic artist people here or radiology people here?
So honestly speaking,
Miss
I
Bashara?
I really didn't understand why I had to do this course,
Uh-huh.
but
So,
but
but
now that I'm in the course and I see what the course is about, I recognize its importance, and I now realize why they would subject us to this
I like this.
information.
Subject you to this. It's not that we want to punish you, it's because there are gaps in the developmental process of acquiring program specializations. And for far too long, degrees focused on the technical skills to the brief of the other skills. And in the real world, we need these skills. That's one of the reasons why we actually put you all in so much group work, even in your technical subjects. You'd realize that you have a lot of group-based activities. Now, I know if I ask this question, how many people hate group work? Everybody's hand will go up. Yes? You see your hands already up on it. All right. Jimda, why do you hate group work?
So because there are some persons in my group that I need to be on their backs and remind them, hey, you have to do this. You need to join the meetings. You're not answering.
Mm-hmm.
That is
Mm-hmm.
why I don't like group work. I just feel like their mother sometimes.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you don't like leadership positions then, in other words.
Yeah, I don't. It just stress me out a little bit too much.
Right. Do you find yourself having to do that all the time?
Sometimes, yeah, I did
Right.
that all the time last semester.
Right. And what program are you doing?
My degree in accounting, bachelor's in accounting.
Okay. Anybody else has a different experience with their group activity, or would you all concur with Kayla? Would you agree with what Kayla has to say about group work, or have you had a different experience? Come on, guys. Time to
So
participate.
I think when it comes to group work, it's a lot of mixed feelings,
Uh huh.
especially um so agree with what she was saying. Sometimes you are in a group and you feel like you're the only one pushing your work and you're the only one fighting to get things done. But then when you're in a group of people who are competent and who knows that they have to do this and this needs to get done and
Mm-hmm.
everybody works together, it's such a good experience. So I think
Right.
it's a very complicated situation.
It is because it depends upon the other participants. And why do you think we continually put you through that process?
I fully
I
believe this
think
has stressed me out.
No, it's nothing to do with
I
stressing
fully
anybody else.
believe this has
I
stressed me out.
I believe because when we start to work and work in the real world,
Uh
we
huh.
won't get to choose who we work with. So we need to
Exactly.
learn to work with all the types from now.
Exactly. So is what skill area is it talking to? It's talking to tactical skills.
Patience for one.
Right, right.
Patience.
That's a tactic. Oh, those are the tactical skills of working on it. And of course, you have to support that tactical skill with communication skills. All right. You could have all the technical skills in the world, and if you can't handle working in groups and communicating properly, you everything's going to fall apart. Which is why we have to develop all these skills across the board. Making sense?
Yes.
And we have to think about those skills, the leadership skills that we're dealing with now, negotiating skills, group work, communication. These are the soft skills that make your profession work. It makes you work in leadership positions. And leadership positions do not have to be permanent leadership positions. So, from some, when you start to work in the real world around you, you're going to find that when you have some group-based activities, yes, you might have a what is called a positional or legitimate leader in your organization, but they may hand over, if you are so fortunate to have that type of leader, they may hand over the responsibility of some sort of outcomes or some project to you to lead on behalf of the team that you're there. It means taking on added responsibility and coordinating other people and negotiating with other people, getting people to contribute. Those are the tactical skills that you're developing. But we have to be careful because you got to remember we don't want to bully people into doing things. We have to motivate them. There's a difference, right? All right,
So
guys.
I don't bully them. I just talk to them very nicely.
No, it doesn't sound that way, Kayla. Just your tonality of your voice is telling me you bully people a lot.
Well, sir,
You see there,
um,
right there, right there. There's that bully tone. No, sometimes
right?
yes, you do need to, crack the whip sometimes when you're working with a group. But I mean, when you get people motivated and they understand that this is something that we have to do for all of us to benefit, we have to each pull our weight, then people begin to understand there's a responsibility, and we have to accept the fact that I have a responsibility in this group to make sure I meet the at least the requirements that have been asked of me. But we want, through this leadership program, to understand that if you're a follower or leader, it doesn't matter. You are equally responsible for the success of the organization that you're working with. We collectively sit upon each other's shoulders and help each other all the way through the process. All right. So it's something that I'm hoping by the end of this, your group experiences will be a more enriched experience moving forward. All right. So when we talk about the second part, the being, here we're talking about your values, your ethical values. What are those things that you know you hold dear to you? What helps you to make those hard decisions? What is makes you a person of character? All right. What do you perceive to be wrong or right? And we will deal with that when we deal with the ethical values in more detail. But that is the being part, because that then, the combination of your knowledge and your being, then dictates your doing, because your doing and how you behave reflects what you know and what you believe, working in tandem with each other to achieve the goals that the organization has. All right. And that vision and goal is going to push you in a particular direction. So you can't get away from that process. That process is something that you're going to have to go through over and over again. And if you believe in lifelong learning, and that's what the college is trying to prepare for you, that you are going to be lifelong learners. In fact, to the day you die and then some, you're going to continue learning, and you'll ultimately learn the lesson of what is actually behind, or what is, what's the meaning of this life when we pass on to the other side. Nobody here has gone and then come back to tell us about what happens. So we continually learn all the way through. All right. And if you are going to be um, vibrant in your society and vibrant in your life, you're going to be continuously learning more and more about not just your skill levels, because when you get to your retirement ages and stuff, there are other new things, new areas you want to learn about, you want to do and develop. So there's a whole different field that you'll probably get into, because life doesn't end when you stop working in those jobs. You still have to, work on things and explore different aspects of your life, explore different types of relationships that will come up. You have to explore, dealing with medical issues that you didn't even think about when you were growing up. All right. So there's a whole uh, sphere of stuff that we're going to be getting involved with. We have to stop thinking about life around different things. All right. Now, some of the pitfalls that we have to look out for is this first one here is the problem of leadership that is fixated upon doing things right and doing things only when all the pieces are put together, and that is a fixation on perfection. When we get fixated on um, that type of we can't do anything until we get everything in place situation, that is saying a couple things. That says, one, we don't tolerate mistakes, and two, we're not willing to take chances. No, most of you, and has anybody here done entrepreneurship, fundamentals of entrepreneurship? I know some of our first year people would not yet. Devika?
No, sir. Misunderstood your question.
No, well, what did you think I was asking about?
If we ever do entrepreneurship on your whole,
What have you? Because you
yeah,
might.
when I was doing keep,
Uh-huh, right. Okay, go ahead. What is one of the biggest issues that they talk about in developing entrepreneurial activities? What is the one thing they ask people to that we have to be concerned with in terms of risk taking?
um, that was a few years ago, but I
Doesn't
think
matter. Go ahead.
I well, I would say self doubt was one of the things you have to look at.
Right. I mean, the concept that I'm trying to get to is that oftentimes people fail at entrepreneurial activities because they are risk averse. So that's why a lot of people never think about setting up their own businesses because they don't have the mindset to take risks. And this is taking a risk without ever knowing what the outcome is likely to be. Making decisions without having all of the necessary information to spend your money or make a commitment towards doing something. Though that is what entrepreneurship is about. It's why entrepreneurial spirit is something that has to be rewarded by, when you do business and you start to make money, that is the profit that is why entrepreneurs need to be paid with profit. All right? Because they're the ones to take the risk. All right? Making sense? But if you are, as a leader, risk averse, that you don't like taking risks, you start to tell the people under your leadership that you don't want anybody making mistakes, so therefore you're not going to tolerate error making. And secondly, we don't take chances. And that's a dangerous type of mindset to have developed. It often leads to an organization that becomes what stagnant, and in our dynamic environment, a stagnated organization will will cease to exist, right? Because you'll become obsolete very quickly in that kind of circumstance, and that has a tendency to happen based upon the nature of the leader in question that is guiding the organization. It is. I've worked in organizations like this where there was this, we can't do things if we no, it's a risky balance because you can also have organizations led by people who are willing to take all kind of dangerous risks. We call it risk management for a reason. All right, you don't take wild risks. You take risks based upon some sort of calculated variables, and you look at what you can control and manage. But if you take no risk at all, then you're the other end of the spectrum. You do nothing and become obsolete and become, you get left out of the market or you get left out generally across the board. So those are things that we have to pay attention to. That's something that we have to look at in the doing part. Some leaders get stuck and they don't do anything because they're afraid to do so. All right. Um, Learning obviously becomes an outcome of that whole knowing, being, doing developmental model, because as you go through the whole process of knowing, being, doing, the experience of going through that process over and over again, you're going to learn more and more about yourself, about the leadership that you're practicing, the knowledge base of the profession that you're dealing with. As a leader, therefore, you should promote learning among the people around you through through encouraging people's learning, all right, and helping them with it. That's the second part. And by promoting a culture within the organization that helps to encourage learning and learning opportunities within it. So those are things that are kind of critical for you as a leader to start to understand that we are all going to be learning together at all particular points in times. All right. So, purpose means that, so we said relational leadership is purposeful It means that we are committed to that particular vision that we have of the future that we want to make this change towards. And the change that we're looking at generally is going to be evaluated as being something that is a positive change, not only for those of us in the organization, but people who are peripheral to it. Now, arriving at that purpose is one of the things that we have to talk about, because we have to have arrived at a shared vision. Even if I come with the bulk of the information to you, I need to be able to ensure that other people buy in to this shared vision. The best way to do that actually has to do with creating what is called a socialized vision as opposed to a personalized vision. A personalized vision is a situation where I come with an idea and I um, try to sell you on that idea, and you have no say in the vision because it's only something I see. A socialized vision, on the other hand, is one where we bring people together and we say, okay, we want to do X, Y, Z. How do we find ourselves arriving at that position? What position do we want to arrive at? So we arrive at a socialized vision by including every as many people as possible to help develop that particular goal and objective. So the College of Costard actually is a perfect example of what I am talking about, because now some of you may not have been even alive when we started this. So in 1996, 97, I was working in John Donaldson Technical, and we started to get together at, certain ministerial people were getting together to look at how the education system was designed, and started to identify that there was a high level of failure within some of the system, especially in the areas of technical training. And they recognized that there was a need for developing a better access to tertiary level education, because less than 3% of our schooling population at the time were graduating into tertiary education. And that included sixth form as well as technical vocational studies and university. So you're thinking about it. If every year you have 100 people coming through the system and getting passes, only 3 people out of every 100 were actually going on to pursue degree programs. Internationally, it was actually seen as less than 1% of the world population was trying to access tertiary educations. The objective of um, the leadership in education at that time was to increase the rate of participation in tertiary education to a particular level that we had certain percentages that we were trying to get to. But in order to get that level of participation, there were a couple of things that we needed to do. One, we needed to increase the amount of available space that existed in degree programs and higher learning education programs. Two, we had to improve access. And three, we had to provide funds for that. And thus, the government came up with a number of strategies. One, for those of you who might be familiar with this, the government created it wasn't called GATE back then, it was called the Dollar for Dollar program. Anybody remember something like that? Dollar for Dollar program? That may be well before your time. I'm talking about the 90s. Any case, let me just indicate to you what it was. So at the time, the colleges of John Donaldson, San Fernando Technical, Joint Services, and a whole host of different tertiary providers were brought together under COSTAT. Actually wasn't called COSTAT at that point in time. It was just called the National Community College of Trinidad and Tobago, and that concept drove the development of COSTAT as it exists today. It was all of these institutions getting together and developing a socialized vision of where we saw the future of education for a community college in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, coming out of that, there were some changes that took place coming out in 2005, 2006, where we had the development of the University of Trinidad and Tobago and COSTAT going kind of two ways, because what was going to happen then is that the UTT was developed to try and absorb a number of the highly technical engineering programs that required a lot more what I will call physical plant and infrastructure put in place for it. And the softer skill areas like management and a couple of the allied nursing and medical areas went across into the area of Costat. So we had a bit of a division that took place there. Some of it was political football that went on, but we had a whole set of situations. So we had two organizations that were created to help move and improve access to tertiary education. Alongside that came the development of the GATE program that you know today, and it was 100% gate funding, because prior to that it was dollar for dollar, meaning that for um, every dollar that the government put in, so basically it was like a 50% finance program put in place. So every dollar you spent on education, the government on tuition, the government will spend $1 with you. So you got 50% financing, which technically some of you all here may be at that level of dollar for dollar, but now it's probably called through the gate means testing. It determines the level of coverage with gate. All right, so you don't need to sell out your business, but just letting you all know. The development of COSTAT and its ideals of continuous learning and UTT as well, both came out of this socialized approach to developing the concept of where are we going. We wrote up our mission and vision statements, and we set up the organization based upon the accomplishment of those particular goals. About in about our 10th year of operations, the Trinidad and Tobago rose to the level of two-thirds of our population, of our schooling population, had access and was accessing um, tertiary level education. Some people went abroad and pursued their things, but the vast majority of people were doing their educations, their tertiary education locally. And that was the objective that was set up with the UN, that we wanted to increase our participation rate in tertiary education up to two-thirds of the thing. In fact, there's room for improvement. We want to get more coverage. We want to approach like 80, 90% of your population moving into that area. So you'd understand that clearly we've identified some of and we've realized some of the visions that we had for Trinidad and Tobago coming out of the future. And that wasn't done in isolation. It was done alongside the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And I was part of that process back from since 1996. We were part of the steering committees working with it. We worked together. It was a long process. It didn't not until 2000 was the legislation set up for it, and then the following year in 2002 we had UTT's constitution set up as well. And ever since then, it's been a long growing process for both of these institutions to grow and improve itself to be able to meet the stated requirements and visions of the organizations. So understand that what we're talking about here is that is where you have people buying in, as opposed to a personalized vision, which is a different approach to things. So the best way to do it is to actually try and use that socialized approach to developing the purpose of an organization. It is therefore important that if COSTAT was started in the 2000 and kind of really got its teeth running by 2006 7, and started to get all its assets together and running with some purpose. Um, Same thing with UTT. Everybody was working on all guns basically by about 2007 2008. Then of course we had that whole financial fiasco that came up. We By 2010 we had more than 12,000, almost 15,000 students coming in, um, pursuing. It was really a huge, we started to experience what we call diseconomies of scale. We had more students than we were capable of actually dealing with, and therefore, they had a peak, and then now we're on a more uh, sustainable approach to things. And then, of course, we then had the pandemic, which kind of slowed everything down, zapped, and we had a whole set of things that have happened throughout the lifespan of any organization. Now, that the important thing is that since from then to now, we've had a lot of change in staff. So every time we have new staff coming on, it's important that the people from the original grouping resell the vision to the new people coming in, especially the staff. It's more critical for staff than it would be for students because it is the staff and the faculty that is important in spreading the vision and making sure that that vision comes across. There's a particular type of behavior that's expected of lecturers and teachers and the staff of the organization. I'm not saying we're perfect, but at the end of the day, it is our responsibility to ensure that this vision is continuous. That it's not something that when us old fogies die off or leave the organization, the vision doesn't change. All right, but it's a constant movement towards a particular purpose. So that is something that we want to pay attention to. So at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is a socialized vision that drives an organization, not just the vision of one individual who saw something and wants that to be done. It was, in fact, it's very easy now in our circumstances now to do it because now we have the proliferation of social connectivity. But back in the early 90s and stuff, I remember the internet had just come out. Emails was something that was, kind of new back in the early 90s. Prior to that, it didn't exist. You all have to remember that. Huh? Things you all take for granted with smartphones and stuff in now times didn't exist back then especially to the level of proliferation that it is at this point in time. I still remember having a pager. I don't know if any of you all uh, ever saw a pager. No? But you all know about pagers, right? You've probably seen it in movies and things.
Yes, sir. Pages
Yeah.
and pilots and
Yeah. My first phone that I got was a Nokia 101. And that was a second generation phone at the time. Nokia 101. There were earlier editions. You had one of the first things was the Ericsson 100. Big ass phone with a big antenna, battery about this size, like a brick. Um, so I still remember the having that phone in my hand. It was a huge phone, and you paid for phone calls coming in and out. So once you answer that phone, you're paying money across the board. And we used to pay something like $5 a minute for $5 a minute per second. We didn't have per second calling. So if you spoke for a minute and a second, you had to pay for the next minute. $5 a second, a minute, guys. Um, the text wasn't you couldn't text people. You had to make voice calls. It was really something else. So you have to understand technology helps to support the ability of organizations to easily start to do socialize their vision and purpose. So, but it's an idea, of course, that technology helps to support this type of activity. So it's something that you want to pay attention to moving forward. All right. So you want a vision that helps us to inspire people to want to do good things, and that's why we're talking about visions and purpose of organizations that help us to look towards a better tomorrow. Now, will it all be good? Well, the problem with that is that none of us can really predict a lot of things that are likely to happen in the future. But as much as possible, utilizing current standards and current information, you try to set these goals and desires up, our dreams, as the case would be, with the current understanding of how things work. So you make decisions now for the future. All right, because there is evidence to indicate that decisions made in the past were detrimental for what takes place in the future, because we made those decisions based on poor information. We know more now, and therefore we are likely to be able to change some of the behaviors from the past that we no longer see as being good or safe for our world. So that's something that we also have to pay attention to. But we understand, therefore, from I kind of need to speed up this process a little bit. We understand that the information that we're looking at here talks to how important it is for vision to be understood by everybody, and how that vision and purpose drives the organization towards its objectives. If without it, we are almost like just existing, kind of floating on the ocean, and wherever the ocean takes us, that's where we will go. There's nothing making us move a pilot towards any particular destination. And that is the way in which that works. There is a group of you that will present a chapter that is going to be focused on that. Vision and strategic direction. There's a chapter on that that you're going to be dealing with that will come into a lot of details about vision and mission statements and so on. All right. Miss Raplau always seems to have problems coming in. Yes. Hopefully she makes it in this time. All right, so let's move this thing a little faster. All right, so one of the other things that we have to be looking at is that we are making change. Welcome, Ms. Ruplal. Did she make it in? Umila, welcome. All right, one of the problems with change is just that, it's change. So, Kerry, tell me, when's the last time you experienced significant change in your life? Kerry?
Um, that's a good question.
Right. And there's a
Um,
reason why you can't remember any significant change in your life. It's because more than likely things really haven't changed much. Yes? No?
well, the only change I had as well, November, we moved into our new home, so that
Right.
I guess
Okay.
that is a significant
That's a
change.
significant change. When you say we moved in, this is yourself, your wife, or yourself and your family,
Yeah, self and family, yeah, wife and
right?
kids.
Right. So that's a key change for everybody, but it's a welcome
Yeah.
change, correct?
Yep. Yeah.
Right. What about if all right, so that's the nature of change. Some change is welcome because it's seen as overall being positive, and if everybody views it as being a nice positive thing, then the transition is likely to be smoother and more, um, you know, more orderly and that type of stuff. But when we don't know the nature of the change, especially in organizations, whether or not the change is going to be good or bad, we run into the problem of the change being very hard to negotiate. This is especially because we become accustomed to doing things in one particular way. All right. And when we become older, or the older we become, the more fixed we are. We want things in a particular manner. We want to do things the way we are accustomed doing it. And coming back to the college, in fact, big transition took place in 2019 into 2020 when the pandemic, which is the trigger event that they talk about on this page, on this thing here, created the need for the organization to transition out of its face-to-face modalities into the online modalities to deal with the situation. Now, we were already trying to make the transition into the online environment um, from as far back as 2010, even before there, we were starting to set up Moodle classes, and I ran a lot of my classes with a Moodle section built to support the face-to-face classes. But the full transition that we were able to do within that was actually kind of paved the way by having people kind of have an online partial online environment set up for their classes. But the mitigating factor here, or the factor that required us having to do that, was that trigger event. The transition was fast in the sense that we were able to move within the space of about 2 months. We were able to transition the vast majority of our classes from the face-to-face to the online environment, and that changed the mix for lots of people, mostly for you guys, but for a lot of us as well. It had serious change that we felt. Um, and we were able to benefit from that change, especially in terms of quality of life and work study balance and school study balance and that type of stuff. And you all, as students, spoke to the need for us to maintain this format because you guys decided unanimously that you all didn't want to come back to face sessions. Because when we did come out of the pandemic, um, and we started to return to what we refer to as normal life, the vast majority of people simply said, "No, I think I prefer this classroom setup." Because ever since then, we tried to set up face to face classes. Students would ignore it. They would say, "Nope, I'm not coming to any face to face class." Why is that? Why? What? Any of you all here, explain to me why is it that you all prefer this online environment as opposed to having a place to go to class and such? I know some of your classes you still have some face-to-face sessions, but the vast majority of your work is done online. Not so.
Yes, it's very accommodating for people who work.
Especially people who work, and that's one of the most important things about the college. The college services people who are transitioning between work and part-time studies, and it makes it very more user-friendly, I guess. So in the model for change navigation, and we have a another team that's going to present on a chapter on that area of leading change. That's the last presentation. We often speak about the process of you unfreeze, you make your change, and then refreeze. So what that particular thing about the refrozen thing is actually discouraged. What we have to do is to remain in a more malleable situation, or what they refer to as a more slushy type of environment, so that we don't know what's coming around the corner next, what is likely to change, and therefore we have to be in a circumstance that allows us to pivot. So we have to set ourselves up to be flexible, right? And regularly check and make sure that we are meeting the needs of the environment. In fact, the rollover to the new Moodle this in this last semester this year has also a kind of push into a um, new servers and it means that we are investing much more money now in the online solutions and trying to make sure that the software that we're utilizing is relatively dependable in the situation that we're looking at now, because there have been issues in the past when it comes to the e-classroom solutions. All right. So change, dealing with change is always going to be one of the biggest challenges that leadership has to deal with. In fact, most times you call upon what we in organizations whenever there's change to be made. You usually have to bring in special teams of change management personnel to be able to help navigate this way through, because most of us don't like change because we become accustomed to the way things are running, and as a result, we end up, being rather, what's the word, anti-change, and we don't want things to change. We don't agree with the change. Find all kind of arguments, and in fact, for a lot of people, I remember when we made the transition out of the technical college into well, I should say the technical institute into the college. A lot of my colleagues who I worked alongside in John Donaldson refused to come across. They were, stuck in the old methodology, didn't trust where we were going, and a good few of them went back into the secondary school system because they didn't agree with losing what they saw as the holidays that we had. They still wanted to be treated along those lines. So The transition into tertiary education did have people who fell away along the side. All right. The whole process is time consuming, of course, to say the least. I remember that being real problematic. All right. So the next area that we start to look at now is the inclusivity aspect of the model. So we're gonna have to step up the speed at which we're dealing with this. So when we talk about being inclusive, we're talking about this element here. So this kind of captures what the whole concept of inclusivity is going to be. And then we'll talk about some of the other elements. So it means understanding, valuing, and actively engaging diversity in views, approaches, styles, and aspects of individuality, such as gender, sexual orientation, or culture, that adds multiple perspectives to a group's activity. Now, this is a massively important area because of this last element here, the perspectives issue. Now, I want you all to think about something. You all are all, some accountants, some radiology, some of you in different skill levels. Let's say you're fully qualified and you're in a position to teach. How would you teach somebody who's blind in your class among other sighted individuals?
So can you
Devika?
repeat the question?
Who's that? So, Ms. Basarat, you are doing what? Radiology?
Radiography, yes, sir.
Radiography, sorry, my bad. Um, how would you teach somebody radiography to a blind person?
Um,
Hmm.
I wouldn't use visual effects. I would more so use like verbal, um, like a
So
verbal
let me
teaching
let me
style.
ask you. Let me ask you. I mean, let's be honest here. Do you think a blind person can be a radiographer?
No,
Why not?
because you need to look at patients, you need to look at the scans, you need to know how you positioning them,
Uh
how you
huh.
positioning the equipment, things like that.
Okay. Everybody else agrees with her?
I agree, but maybe they could do it. It might be a little more challenging,
Hmm.
but it will
What
it's just a
discipline
little
are you
it's just a
working
little
with, Devika?
in radiography as well.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Um,
it'll just be a little harder. I'm not sure how they will do it. I don't know if
uh,
their work would be
have,
as
have
up to
anybody?
standard, but
All right. So has anybody here ever worked with people who were differently able before in a classroom space, as far as you're aware of? So I have had a couple of unique experiences in that I've had students with several types of challenges. I've had blind people in class. I've had hearing impaired. I've had people with social issues, like people on the Asperger's state. What do you call it? Oh God, I could never.
Asperger's.
Asperger. Yes, I've had people of that nature. I've had people with cerebral palsy in my class in wheelchairs, um, and I've been able to successfully navigate my way through it. The one that was the most challenging was when I taught economics to a pair of blind gentlemen from the Blind Welfare Association. And that stretched me the most, I think. And I remember that there were teachers in other classes who did not want them in their class because they said there's no way they could teach them. And they were unwilling to work with them. And this is the point that I'm trying to make here. The reason why we need to appreciate people from these different circumstances is because we will not see life from their perspective. Challenge any of you all to navigate a week, no, not even a week, a day in your life sitting in a wheelchair in Trinidad and Tobago and see how much places you can't go to and see how much things you can't do and see how left out you feel in our society. And you understand what I'm talking about? People can identify with that, especially people in radiography. You all should be able to see that because you all may come across people more often in that field who have skeletal issues, who are paralyzed and that type of stuff. You all follow what I'm talking about? If we can't be inclusive to those types of individuals, just generally those who are differently abled, we will never understand the world from their perspective. The same thing applies to people who come from different genders and sexual orientation because we are locking off their perspective. And for us to be good leaders, we need to be inclusive of that diversity. I'm not saying you have to become blind or you need to become paralyzed and lose the use of. I'm not saying that you have to be consider yourself a trans person or be gay or something. I'm not telling you to be any of these things or even agree to be them. But we need their position and their point of view to be able to get a more holistic view of the world in which we are trying to find solutions for problems. Okay? Um, Men have to think about the world around them from the perspective of gender for them to understand why male aggression is such a problem. And similarly, women will also need to appreciate the male perspective of things, um, because there is a sense of there are certain psychological elements that we need to pay attention to. But engaging with diversity is one of the most important elements of being inclusive. Now, around us, we're looking at a number of situations right now where it seems as if we're losing this battle of inclusivity and diversity because we have a president in the United States who's signing executive order after executive order that is ignoring and moving the goalposts basically back to the narrow definitions of what it is to be a human being basically across the board. And of course, what they're doing is just throwing people out, baby and the bathwater altogether across the board. That is not inclusive behavior. That is exclusive behavior by excluding people all over the society. And unfortunately, whatever the United States does, it tends to pick up traction around the world. And you start seeing that same behavior. In fact, some of the other countries are already responding with like type activity when it comes to Americans in their environment. So the action is just breeding normal responsiveness from other people around the world. So we need that perspective for us to really understand the world as it appears to them or to others, as opposed to the limited view that we have ourselves. Our point of view is not the only position, and if we are unable to tackle the issues and problems around us by trying to get a more holistic view of the world, then we are going to make decisions that are likely going to leave other people out. So it's really a very of critical importance for us to be inclusive, especially to those areas of or people or parts of the population that we don't think are important. All right. We have to remember inclusivity helps in determining how people feel within the organization. That requires, of course, listening with empathy and proper listening skills. We create an environment in which where people feel safe, a safe environment, and that's something, for example, that teachers are supposed to do. They're supposed to create classrooms that are safe spaces, where despite your view of something, you're not going to be people aren't going to jump down your neck for it. But unfortunately, some teachers themselves have very closed off views about certain things, certain activities, certain behaviors, and don't add to the inclusivity of the classroom, but rather to create barriers in the classroom spaces. So there's a really curious balance that a leader has to find to be able to bring to bear these various populations and views and perspectives into the decision making process, into the organization. It actually strengthens the organization because we can speak to what is good for everybody and not just only for one part of society as we move across the things. All right, so everybody kind of gets this inclusivity issue and its importance. Yes?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Now, there's some specific elements that we might need to touch on. Let me just make sure because this PowerPoint is on the classroom. You can always check it out. I want to kind of make sure I'm getting all of the right. Inclusive behaviors include utilizing consensus approaches of decision making as opposed to democratic decision making processes. Now, what's the difference there? Anybody? How many of y'all, when you come to an impasse in a group, use voting as a way to make a decision? This could be in group activities, it could be in class activities, whatever. Some teachers actually utilize that. Yeah, Jane and Kimna, what do you use, democratic or consensus? Or what do you understand by democratic? Janie, go ahead. Could open your mic and explain what you mean.
Sorry, I was getting a little trouble with my mic. So I prefer to take a vote. So I usually just ask everybody what they prefer or give options and
Uh-huh.
pick the one everybody choosing most.
Right. So let me position you. We have a room of 100 people, right? And you ask a question, they make a decision, and the majority of people who vote towards it is 50, 56 people. How much does that leave who don't agree with you?
44?
Uh-huh. So now you have to move forward with the decision that the 56 have made. How do you think that 44 feels?
I said less than ideal.
Right. And that's the danger of democratic decision making. Consensus building is we come to a decision by possibly amending the decisions to include the point of view of the people who are having a problem with one of the options. So the options can never be A and B. It needs to be A, B, and there needs to be more options that allow for some of the concerns of the B part to be to an A part to be brought together. It is a longer process, and that's one of the reasons why we often find organizations moving forward utilizing vote because it's the easier way to get something done, easier and faster. The more long-lasting consensus building model approach is the better choice, but it requires more investment in time. Because if we were to, rather than go to a vote and say, okay, well, forget them 44 people, the 56 of us will go ahead. What you end up doing is you start getting your group, you start splintering your group, and you start creating factions inside the organization by ignoring us. And that is, those 44 people, though they may be a minority, they are a massive chunk of your organization who have some problem with a decision and have voted in another direction. You follow me? So that is not something that is should be ignored by leaders. In fact, they should, at as much as possible, try to avoid using systems or decision making processes that help to alienate sections of their organizations. We do this in society all the time. We make decisions, pass laws that leave large groups of the population as if they don't matter, they feel marginalized, and they feel ignored. Consider, for example, the 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 issue of people who are differently abled. A lot of decisions and voting that takes place, eliminates those individuals. We also practice a harsh form of ageism where we do things in our society, we make rules and decisions that are detrimental to people who are past certain age groups. We have no thought about what's happening. We don't care because those decisions are what the popular, what is popular with the vast majority of our society. The rest of us, could walk away and not care about them, that type of stuff. And you'll come back to the point that you made, Jane. Well, we had a vote and people voted for this, and this therefore will be the way we go. Again, making decisions based upon that type of voting system is actually more damaging. So actually choosing governments using votes is also damaging, as we could probably see. All right. We also have to pay attention to the people. James, you have another question or point you want to make? I see your hand still up. Janie, Miss Garcia,
No, sir.
you left your hand up. Okay, no worries. All right. So let me, in terms of inclusivity, we also need to pay attention to not only the people that make up the organization, but people who are affected by the organization or the group. All right. So that will be your stakeholders and shareholders. So these are people who are not directly involved in the group, but they are affected or have a vested interest in what we're doing. Okay, and we need to pay attention to them and be inclusive of their ideas and their needs and wants as well. That's something that we also have to pay attention to when it comes to inclusivity. All right. So there's a diagram here from the text that actually speaks to the 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 sort of division that people could get. You can get based upon your external individuals. You could get people who are supportive, people who are antagonistic, people who are problematic, and those who are low priority. The objective here would be if you know where they fall, then you're likely to use different strategies for inclusion in relation to them. We tend to always have to deal with those who are antagonistic and problematic. The gap being in terms of their stance on it. Antagonistic can be those that create the most amount of problems because they see the concept or the idea as being of high importance and they have a high level of opposition towards it. And therefore, we're going to spend a lot of resources trying to deal with these antagonists. Whether it is low importance but high opposition, those individuals can be ignored. But the problem is, what you really want is to draw everybody through a process of consensus building to be supportive. So you want them to be in this area region here, or possibly even the low priority if it's low importance, but they're still supporting you. All right, type of situation in terms of how you deal with your stakeholders and shareholders. All right, that makes sense so far? All right, so that brings us to the next element, which is empowerment. And in essence, what empowerment is about, it's about giving over power to those in the organization besides the leader. So the leader has to be able to empower everybody in the organization. And that empowerment is twofold in the sense that you want people in the organization to want to take ownership and take control and exert their power. And secondly, you want to create the environment that encourages that type of activity and behavior as a leader. That's your responsibility. Those are the two things that empowerment is talking about. In essence, therefore, it speaks to something that traditional leadership programs do not encourage, and that is sharing and giving up power to others while being the leader. Um, the older systems always speak to hold on to power and protect your power by all means, because that power is what you utilize to be able to manipulate other people around you to get what you need to do. Remember, we talked about power and influence. in this system we're talking about, we need to share, leaders need to share their power. They need to give up their power. They need to empower others to be able to become better leaders and better participants in the organization, and more importantly, prepare these individuals to continue the organization's journey through the future. Because in empowering those other people around you, those followers around you, you ensure that you have a possible leader to come from the organization. Because, having the practice, they're able to take on the leadership role after the fact. You following me? All right. So the first element we talked about, people willing to take charge of things, use their initiative. Those things have to be encouraged. You can't have an organization created in such a way where you're trying to empower people but you're punishing them. So you have to make sure that the environment that you're dealing with is a learning environment, willing to take risks, willing to handle mistakes, and not just punish people and cut them off when things happen or don't go the way that they ought to go. Because again, we don't learn everything in one go. We make mistakes. We have to make changes, and you have to create the environment where that when people take chances and they show initiative and they fail, you don't punish them, because that then sends a mixed signal. You want people to take initiative, but yet still you're going to punish them when mistake takes place or there's some form of failure that wasn't avoidable. Those are the kind of things that you have to make sure that you're sending the same message across the board. Um, that's going to be an interesting balance that the leaders need to get. You're also going to be having to deal with the individuals in your organization who perceive your sharing of power as a dilution of power. And that dilution of power is seen as a form of weakness. In the relational leadership program, we look at this sharing of power as something that increases the power, you know, tenfold, or kind of squares or cubes your power, because you are in empowering other folks to take charge and take ownership of different elements of the organization and the organization alter on its own. It means that once you have these people's support, there's no way they're going to be able to move you off that. In fact, they're going to look for you to inspire them to do the same thing, moving as they themselves become leaders in the organization. Of course, we are assuming that you don't have traitors involved with your thing, but this is, of course, is really in a circumstance where, again, we are aspiring to a better sort of organization. I mean, we're not in a den of snakes that everybody's looking to you know what's the word I want to use? We're not looking to pull each other down kind of situation, but we're being honest and straightforward with each other. The ethical values that we speak about, that comes up afterwards. All right, so you see the discussion here about zero sum game, and again, sharing power is always looked upon in the older systems as something that is a negative element. Types of power that they're talking about is, you have power over, that's autocratic, you have power with, collaborative, and then you have power alongside, collegial. That is the nature of the power that we're looking at. Now, there is a group that will be doing a specific chapter, power and influence, from the DAFT, that will go into a lot more details, hopefully, once they present their chapter well. That will tell us something a little more about that. Now, most of us have there's well, types of power that people have is social power and positional power, and we want to pay attention to the bases of or sources of those power. So the bases of social power are expert power, referent power, legitimate power, coercive power, and reward power. So expert power is power that people give to individuals, or power that somebody is able to exert because of the expertise that they have developed through training and experience, right? And we give over to that power because we trust that this person knows what they're doing and they are an expert in their field. So definitely, that is a form of power that exists in organizations and even among your peers and friends. Huh? Reverent power refers to the strength of the character of an individual who, you think about this old wise sage who's there who can guide you. Primarily, it's given to people who are, you know, basically looked upon as being somebody with a lot of institutional knowledge. They've been around for a while. They've seen organizations change, and therefore they have this reverent power. Now, real or assumed, but most people will respect this individual's opinion about things because they're proven in the past to be right and to be generally correct about what's going on. So that's another way people can get power. Legitimate power is power given to somebody based upon the role that they play in the organization. So generally, what you find is a manager or a supervisor or a vice president has power in the organization because that is the role that they are given within the organization. However, that power is more fragile than people think because if you act on that power without just cause and just and do it in the right way, you can damage that power forever, and you can damage the people around you very quickly. So therefore, we refer to this legitimate power as being very fragile. With that legitimate power, you can in fact utilize coercive power and reward power because you then become the gatekeeper for either doling out punishments or doling out rewards. And this is where things can go awry because if you dole out punitive sanctions and remove benefits and arbitrarily, then you are likely to bring down a lot of critical um, analysis of your use of power and how fair you are, and people you'll make a real stink of things. So coercive power, those things you do to force people into accomplishing the goals of the organizations, and reward power will also be giving over to people things like raises and plaques, not monetary in nature, but just recognition and those types of intrinsic things that make people feel, hey, you did a good job. This is really good, and it's reinforced across the board. This is, interestingly enough, that intrinsic um, type of rewards is probably more beneficial than those that are extrinsic. People might look upon, getting a bonus and special privileges and that kind of stuff as being the one that they would like. But interestingly enough, the intangibles are the ones that mean the most to individuals as reward power. So this is how people get power and they can use that. Now, the problem with it is that um, sometimes this power can be attributed to individuals incorrectly, and in a lot of instances, people overestimate the kind of power that they have. So, for example, you have a situation here where somebody arrives in a position of power because they're viewed as being an expert on a topic, but others may attribute some source of the power without knowing that what's up. For example, when somebody fears your disapproval because you have reverent power, and a lot of people who have reverent power in an organization are actually quite unaware of the fact that they have that type of um, differential position in the organization. Other people, and this is especially with people who have been in an organization for a fair long amount of time, they they end up in these senior, not necessarily senior positions, but they're looked upon as being, these stalwarts who are in an organization, and they tend to reflect a lot of what is known about the organization. We refer to it as institutional knowledge. That institutional knowledge makes the analysis of what's taking place really spot on because they can actually tell what is likely to happen afterwards, and they know the cause and effect across the board because they've probably seen it all before. And that may be something that people are unaware that other people are looking upon them from that perspective. Something for you all to think about. Another thing is that we give away our power because we don't want to contradict people around us, and that's something that is Now, this is especially with junior staff. Junior staff may come into an organization and feel because they don't think they know as much as other people, they are not willing to speak their mind in terms of maybe a different way because they feel if this person is considered the expert, then how does my opinion feel with that? The problem with that is that you should just um, ask a question that could probably point to what you're thinking, to be able to do that, and don't automatically dispense with your position as being, well, I must be wrong because the experts saying otherwise. That's another thing that you want to pay attention to. We also get power attributed to people in an undeserving thing because we assume certain things. So I like this example here. A group assumes that you are an English major and therefore you will be better at writing up the reports and correcting errors and maybe doing the editing and stuff like that. Now, we don't really have communication. Well, we do have communication majors, but I don't think we have any in this class. But there may be that type of assumption that, let's say, okay, if this was a sort of general mathematics, maybe there were some math elements involved with this class. You might say anybody who's doing radiology or any of the IT and that kind of stuff, they would, or that this is a perfect idea. You might say the person who's the IT student here, let's give them the PowerPoint to do because they will know how to use the computer better than me. But the reality may be, I think it's Christian here. Um, the reality may be that setting up a PowerPoint is not something that is necessarily the forte of an IT specialist, but maybe an somebody who's more of an application user. So you might find a graphic artist might be given that thing. Hey, you're a graphic artist. You're supposed to have an idea how to design a PowerPoint that looks pretty and inviting and that type of stuff. So we give away power without really truly understanding it, whether or not that it's deserved. You understand? Those kind of things are important for us to remember as well when we arbitrarily ascribing people with various forms of power. Okay, now this concept of power being a finite resource is also something that older methods or older approaches to leadership have sort of preach. You have a limited amount of power and therefore you're not going to, you have to be very careful how you share that power. The relational leadership program does not ascribe to that. Power is infinite, and in order to empower people, we have to give up more power. And the conventional leaders around there will look at that as being power sharing as being indecisive and avoiding your responsibility. The reality is actually that's not true. It's just a very old type of technique that is utilized. So if you start to utilize modern approaches to leadership, you might come across people who perceive it as being something negative across the board and might tell you to try and try other techniques. But understand the purpose of empowering other people is not to give away your power, but to amplify your own power in the organization. Sharing that power also gets more work done because if you hold all of the power to yourselves, all of the resources to yourself, then you limit the amount of people who can actually get the work done for the organization, and that's something that you really have to pay attention because at the end of the day, you are required to deliver on the objectives of the organization. All right. So this hoarding of power is really a problem that a lot of the older um, models of leadership really speak to. And that actually can result in a lot of negative activities within an organization if it's felt to be that way. One of the other things we have to pay attention to about is the concept of I think it's somewhere here, is the concept of delegation. Delegating activities or tasks does not mean that you are giving giving the responsibility, because you can set somebody up through delegation by giving them the work to do, but you don't give the power that goes with it, which is, the resources required to get the job done. And then when they come back and they fail, they'll feel as if what you've done is really set them up. And unfortunately, that is something that is oftentimes done. People get set up and they get basically kind of punished, because they and this is sort of like a betrayal kind of system that some leaders do. They say, okay, we have to share power. I go set this fella up, and then they go, see, sharing power is not a good idea. That kind of nonsensical approach to things in terms of, trying to share power. Also, this is something a strategy that is sometimes utilized by people who are threatened by other individuals in the organization. So they delegate some sort of activity, withhold some of the access to power and some of the resources, and then when at the end of the day they fail, the leader then uses that failure to say this person not ready. So they're trying to bring them down in the eyes of everybody else who may be looking at that person as a natural transition of power within the organization. That's something that happens a lot. Hopefully you don't fall into that kind of category. So some of the things that you want to get involved with when you are developing self-empowerment is, first of all, education. Acquire more information, try and acquire all the knowledge that is possible. Education, and that's a continuous process. Taking opportunities to lead, um, by inspiring, rewarding, and helping others, and taking the lead where necessary. All right. That means when opportunities arise, you don't shy away from them. You take up the opportunity. So group work needs to be done. You don't like to take charge, take charge. All right. Help, but don't buff people into doing the work. Inspire them and motivate them to get the work done by trying to share the commonality of what we're supposed to do. Structure your day so that and structure your life in such a way that you are going to encourage your own self-empowerment. All right. um, Make sure that you bring the resources that are necessary together. That type of stuff. Structure your life, structure your activities to meet that requirement of self-empowerment. Provide the resources necessary to the people around you. If you are the person that is responsible for empowering others, make sure that you share that. And when you arrive in those positions where you're not quite at the top, but you're also helping to bring people under you into that situation, make sure you are encouraging others to be empowered as well. Mentor those individuals around you, and then of course take on those opportunities where you can actualize the empowerment, and that is item 6. All right. You you as a leader or you as a follower, these are part of your responsibilities of being able to take charge and take control of being empowered across the board. Now, we spoke about this in other concerns, mattering and marginalization. Empowerment means that we empower everybody in the organization, at the center, at the edges, everywhere, to make them feel as if what they do and what they say and what they feel matters to the entire organization, and that we don't, as a group of individuals or as a leader, marginalize these individuals. This happens a lot in larger organizations, especially business organizations, where you have various classes of employees throughout the organization, and you find those who are at the peripherals or at the edges. I see this all the time when it comes to custodial staff in organizations. They're often looked at in a negative light and are actually avoided by other individuals, especially management. And that means that a lot of times what they feel or what they think is often discounted as mattering. So they feel as if they are It doesn't matter what they say or what they do or what they are on about. That results in them being marginalized within the organization. As a leader, this is something you want to pay attention to, because if you want to know the true nature of any organization, go and evaluate the relationship that management has, that leaders have with the lowest individuals and or the persons at the lowest rung of the organizational structure. And you will get a very good idea of how that leader is going to conduct his world around him, or her world around her. It's unfortunate that I've seen in a lot of instances female leaders have the most amount of issues with custodial staff. I don't know why I've seen this, but I've seen the treatment of custodial staff by other female employees as being really negative across the board. I don't know why that, but I've seen that a lot. And that does not lend itself to making people feel as if they matter, and further contributes to the marginalization of great numbers of individuals in the organization who feel, as if my point of view doesn't matter. Anybody can identify with that, having worked in organizations with large staff operational. It happens in the hospitals a lot, but I've actually noticed, as well, having worked in hospital organizations as well. Anybody has an opinion about this or an experience like this that they're willing to talk about or share? All right. So we need to speak about the empowering environments that we have to create, and that is going to be an environment in which everybody feels they matter, even those people on the peripheries or the margins. And we also need to make sure that we are not ridiculing people for making mistakes, or people who have a lack of information and therefore leading to that type of stuff. We don't put people down. We encourage people. We encourage questions, and we also encourage overall learning within the organization. If we eliminate those kind of, that's sort of like a classroom where a teacher says there are no stupid questions, but then they somebody asks a question and they say that's a dotish question, or you kind of being stupid. That ridicule is something that we as teachers, oftentimes are very guilty of creating an environment where people don't want to ask questions. That's why when I ask a question and you all don't respond, I get the idea that sometimes you all are afraid of me, or I'm treated fair in the class, and you're worried that I might humiliate you or that type of stuff. And I'm hoping that's not the case. Is that the case, guys? Are you afraid of me? Are you afraid that I will humiliate you?
No, sir.
Okay, I was hoping for some response. All right. This is being recorded. Just remember that. So it's going to go up on the classroom. All right, guys. So remember, in developing the environment, we need to pay attention to those types of conditionalities that we want to talk about. So um, let's go a little faster past this. I think, well, we spoke about delegation and the fact that you can't delegate without providing the necessary resources, because then you're setting people up to fail. In fact, delegation, the responsibility of the task falls back on the leader, not the person to whom it's delegated. The ultimate responsibility is the person who's actually in the positional power, the situational thing there. All right, so let's see if we've dealt with everything under empowerment. Yes, more or less. All right, so this last area here is in the ethical framework, that we want to talk about. No, it's not the last, the second to last thing that we're looking at. So the relational leadership model emphasizes ethical and moral leadership, meaning that leadership that is driven by values and standards, and leadership that is good, and that means moral in nature. All right. The language you use to examine ethical, moral leadership is of the utmost importance. Some have a tendency to use the terms ethics and morals interchangeably, but there is actually some level of difference. So the the argument between ethics and morality, we're not going to be bothered too much about whether it's ethical or moral decision making. The general idea is that this model of relational leadership, it sits upon being ethical in our behavior, or being moral, if you want to say it. We are actually need to be paying attention to the underlying values of the leader, because those underlying values dictate our behavior. And that behavior should be consistent throughout all of the activities that we get involved with, all of the decisions that we make, and the way in which we treat everybody within the organization and outside the organization as well. So it has to be consistent across the board in all walks of life. And not only for the leader, but also for the organization. You can't have a leader who is behaving in a moral and ethical manner, but you have members within the organization behaving unethically and cheating and stealing and possibly doing even worse. Those kind of things kind of because in essence what happens is that I remember we talked about this many years ago when I was a student in school, and the principal used to say your behavior in public is a reflection of the schools that you attend. So if you behave like a hooligan out in the streets, the school system or the school is seen as a place where hooligans are bred. And I remember, hearing that and always questioning, well, why do we behave this way and that kind of stuff. It's something that we want to pay attention to. But reality is that it's quite true, because the behavior of our employees in the wider environment and in the organization is a reflection of the nature of the leadership that we talk about. And this is the same thing we were talking about earlier when we look at how we feel about the leaders are among us in the governance structure and government and stuff like that. What do we expect? Well, let's put it this way: in our society, we have grown to accept some really unreasonable types of things. We expect that when people get into positions of political power, we expect that they will be corrupt. We expect that they will want um, to be paid on the side. We expect when we go to licensing office that we had to pass change to get things done. When we go to customs, we had to find somebody we know. Isn't that the case across the board in Trinidad, basically? Am I reading that wrong? Guys? Yes? No?
Yes, sir, that is true. I expect that.
Yeah. And if we expect that at the bottom level of the organization, at the level of where we are interacting with the government offices, then where did that come from? That type of behavior. Where did that come from? Did it just grow by itself? And the reality of that is that, as the old people they say, fish does rotten from the head first. Right? We know that saying. Anybody knows that saying?
No,
Fish
sir.
rottens from the head. All right. So the idea is according to that statement, is that if your leadership is behaving in an immoral or unethical way, then it means that everybody throughout the organization will begin to reflect that type of behavior along the way, right, throughout the organization. The same thing is true of if your leadership is ethical and moral in its behavior, then it's going to drive out unethical behaviors across the board. Now, the levels of corruption that we've and grafting that what we see taking place in our public sector is indicative of an endemic problem in our society, because we've grown accustomed to and we actually expect that we have to pay these people to get what the just the normal activities that go on there. and it is a poor reflection of the nature of leadership in Trinidad and Tobago, where everybody knows or everybody assumes that once you go into these offices, you have to find somebody who knows you to help you get these things done. And you had a past change or something had to happen to get these things done, especially in things like the licensing division and Ministry of Works or anywhere where you have to interface with the public. We're always looking for friends and family that working inside there to get things done so we don't suffer as much as Kerry would indicate. All right. That ethical follow well, the lack of ethical values is what concerns this model. And we have to also remember this model kind of came up after we had the 2008 2010 breakdown of the business world around us with a lot of unethical behavior being exposed. And you have the Bernie Madoff, you had the Enron situation, you had a whole host of different activities where a lot of businesses failed. We had our own situations here in Trinidad, and we had some behaviors that were questionable by politicians as well as business leaders. And we see this absolute failure of values and this proliferation of greed before anything and everything. That situation is one of those elements that push towards the development of leadership with a different moral and ethical standpoint. And I look forward to seeing leaders come aboard with better ethical values that will drive a positive change throughout the systems around us. All right. And that's something that is going to be a problem because it may, in fact, take a lot more effort to get this done. But again, as we said, the ethical dimension of the relational leadership model is a ideal against which we need to measure our reality. So, unfortunately, in our country, this element is going to be one of the more challenging areas for us to deal with. In other countries, not so much. But definitely, I think, especially since we know our own environment here, we know that ethical values and moral activities probably going to be a big problem, especially as some moral values vary and change over time. That's another element that we have to pay attention to. Uh, there is a form of moral, well, some people refer to it as moral decay, but there is moral evolution that takes place because we've started to recognize some positions that we've held, some ethical values that we've held in the past not to be true. And that's actually, especially in business, a lot of the values ethically had to be adjusted after the 2008 financial failures around the world. What measures success of organizations is no longer this fixation on profiteering, but also on the impact that the organization is having on the world, especially when we look at it from the position of climate change and pollution and all these other elements, because those things are also seen as negatives that draw away from the attractiveness of any sort of organization. And profits is not the only indicator of being good for our country or being good for the world. We have to think about those things that are also going to be beneficial to all of mankind, not just the shareholders and owners of an organization. Making sense? All right. So what's wrong or right sometimes changes over time, and that is a really interesting phenomenon for us to look at. And we can have lots of debates about ethical values and their evolution over time, over what is right and wrong. All right. Now the organization in from the relational point of view has to be values driven, and those values have to be the ones that we assume are going to be positive values, good values. We don't want negative values driving our organization if you think about it across the board. All right, let's see. Do we have any specific issues here that we need to bring up? This is important. Our challenge today, and this is critical because we just spoke about it, as leaders and citizens, our challenge today is to close the gap between our expectations of ethical leadership and the reality of the frequent breaches of ethical conduct by our leaders. And this is the big problem that we have today. We would like to see a better quality of leadership around us. The problem with it is that because we are unwilling to take up leadership positions, we expect that the people who arrive in leadership positions need to show these ethical developments and changes. Now the problem is, if we continue to expect the worst, we will get worse. And that's the, I remember somebody telling me, people gets the government it deserves, because we are not paying attention to the individuals and characters that we elect into office. All we pay attention to is the party they belong to, the color of the t-shirt. That is the nonsensical approach we have to selection of power and selection of governance in our country. That's a really poor methodology that we're utilizing. So it's something that we have to think about. We have this gap between what we would like and what we actually have, and how we are able to move towards some sort of resolution is going to be something that requires the entire population to take cognizance of the gaps that exist, and the need to make and force our leaders to be more um, ethical in the decision making, and punish them when they don't, when they fall short. Not in the sense that you do anything unethical yourself, but punish them in the sense that they need to be removed from office. You can't expect somebody who's stealing money to put them in charge of the treasury. How's that happening? How, that's a it's not a logical position for us to be looking at. All right. And the problem with it now is that we are getting more and more people who are disengaging from that electoral system because they are so disenchanted by what they see. So we have the alienated people in our society is growing. So you have the vast majority of the population disengaging from the democratic process of voting for leadership. That's something that is a piece of analysis that needs to be done. If you find that there's something called the participation rate in elections, that you ought to be paying attention to, what was the rate of participation. And we've had some really bad scores in the past, especially where there is no discernible difference between one group of individuals and another group of individuals that are positioning themselves to, take to offer themselves as potential governance choices in the country. When you have less than 50% of the population engaging in voting, it signals something very, very um, problematic in our society, that the vast majority of the society has lost confidence in the leadership around them, and that is a signal of something very, very dangerous, because that means there is an undercurrent that the majority is not participating. That can signal some very difficult situations, because that could lead to social upheaval very quickly. All right. So the ethical elements of this model can't be underestimated. They can't be honored, because it is, I think, in our country, one of the most important elements that we have to pay attention to in terms of the development of proper leadership and better leadership. I should say proper leadership, but better leadership. So there are a lot of elements in the moral and ethical values that we're looking for. And this is just, um, reiterating it. And the thing about it is that we have to look for leadership by example. It can't be that I want you to behave this way, but I don't have to behave this way, because the idea is what you do speaks more to me than what you say, and that unfortunately has been sort of some of the things that we hear stories, and we see people or hear about people doing certain things, but yet still they will get up in public forums and make statements that, you know, they're not ethically connected to each other. So what you do speaks more than what you say. So you could say whatever you want, but as long as you behave in a particular manner, I will not trust you. And and that then bleeds itself into the system where nobody trusts anybody. All right. So the leading by example is one of the other elements that they talk about in terms of walking the leadership route. Right. See, they say the Emerson, Ralph Emerson, is what you do speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say. That is the point that we're making here, and which is why, if you look at how children learn, you have to be very careful that you do what you say, because your children are observing very carefully what you're doing. In fact, you all have gone through that process as well as children. We all have, and we can see the double standards. They can generally see that really, really easily. Okay, leading with integrity is not nice and neat and tidy. It is going to be a difficult process because people are going to challenge you. Consider if you end up in a position of political power, the kind of pressure you're likely to face, both from the local environment as well as the international environment, to to do certain things to provide advantages for the other individuals, and the rewards that they're willing to pay you in terms of, you know, what happens when you leave office. You know, they'll start positioning things to you, um, and telling you things about, well, this is a political process. You're not going to be here forever. Think about what's going to happen when you have to leave. You know, you'll have this amount of money and you'll have this set up and we'll give you that and this. There are even some that are even worse. There have been historical examples of international pressure being put on certain leaders in certain countries, where um, a guy would come into the office of the president of a new country, newly elected, and they will come with a suitcase full of money, and they would say, these are the things we'd like for your country to continue doing, or for you to do for us, to, allow these people to come in and, set up their organizations and set up their things. And if you don't, there's a different guy who would come, and he would not be coming with money. He'll be coming with a gun. And if any of you all are interested in that particular perspective, there is a book called, oh boy, suddenly, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And the author has actually done some of his presentations on YouTube. So you can actually check it out. I think his name is Perkins. Um, he was an economic advisor from the IMF and the World Bank, and he spoke about what took place in Latin America and some of the Caribbean countries, in the Caribbean areas, as well as Indonesia and other parts of the world, where international conglomerates, utilizing the IMF and the World Bank, sent these economic advisors in to, kind of pave the way to let you know, if you allow this type of activities, you'll get all of this stuff, all of these so-called benefits, but you have to give us access to your resources, you have to give us access to your water, and all that type of stuff. If you don't, then you'll get visited by different people who will do different things. And there have been cases in which world leaders have been assassinated and killed under questionable circumstances, or they die in questionable manners, very, very quickly after they came to power, or whenever they make some sort of um, definitive decisions that is negative to international business interests. So you could actually look that up. It's called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Look it up, and you see what I'm talking about. Because that is the position that a lot of leaders face when they get into a position of office. Even the people who supported them all the way into getting into that office, they suddenly turn around and they want to know what they're going to get out of supporting you, and that is, it's not an easy place to find yourself in. It's not going to be a easy road to navigate, because you're going to find yourself in a situation that is going to call for you to make decisions that can, and I'm telling you, it's to the case that they would even threaten your family, and the lives of people around you. Not just simply, if you do this, you'll get this, that kind of stuff you get. But they oftentimes come because the stakes are high at that level, in countries and households and stuff like that. It is a extremely stressful position that a lot of leaders find themselves in, and they get involved with that. Okay, so let's crack on to this area here, the relational model, last process. Here we're talking about the process orientation to the thing. So process refers to how the group goes about being a group, remaining a group, and accomplishing group things. In essence, what we're talking about is how we go about doing all of the elements that we spoke about. So in essence, each one of these, being inclusive, being empowering, developing your purpose, and being ethical, all of these are process oriented. There is a way we've prescribed of how to generate your purpose, the knowing, being, doing element. Inclusivity, that's a process that we have to put into practice. The empowerment, we spoke about all the different things we have to deal with. Being ethical, the challenges with that, as well as the way in which we expect. Each of these items are process oriented, and it means that the reason why we want something to be process oriented is because we want to be able to repeat the results and make improvements of the results, because we are forever going through a process all the time, in a never ending process of improvement. Okay, so for example, every time I teach a class, I go through the same process of design, development, delivery, evaluation, reflection, and redesign, and become again. It becomes a process, and the reason why the process is supposed to help us to improve what's taking place. When things are developed in a process orientation, it becomes something that we intend to happen, not something that is happening by chance. All right, that's a really important thing. That the relational leadership model is process oriented, because the outcomes that we're looking for are intentional and not incidental or coincidental. That's a whole different set of incidentals that we can talk about. Incidental and coincidental. It just happens that we had a good outcome this time. No, everything has to be process oriented, because we want to be able to repeat the process and have the same outcomes. If you repeat the process and we're having different outcomes, it means something's wrong with the process. So that's why we have to be looking at it all the time, making certain that what we're doing is measurable, and we can check and see where we're messing up, or where we're doing things right, and tweak them to improve the output that we're looking for along the way. Now, it means that the primary issue here is the process has to take into consideration that we're not talking about a production process or a scientific process. We're talking about a human process. So human processes require um, more effort and more observation, because you're dealing with emotional and psychological issues. We're talking about human behavior, a lot of which is not necessarily predictable in the in the individual circumstance, but is predictable in the group circumstances. So we have to have some sort of process involved that is taking into consideration when dealing with human behavior. And therefore, we are likely to make errors. We are likely to have gaps that would might leave certain people out. So it's not that you try this once and you create a problem and you kind of end up leaving out a whole set of people in the thing. The process means that you get a chance to come back around and do it better and improve upon it. But it requires certain types of things that for us to put in place. So a number of those things would be the process includes working together, collaboration, reflection, feedback. We have to get involved with civil confrontation. We have to help build the community. We have to engage in community building, that is, building the bonds that keep us together, and a profound level of understanding called meaning making. We talked about this before. We have to engage in this in a meaningful way and try to make meaning out of it. And it has to to be it has to matter both to me as the leader or you as the leader and the people who are involved in your organization. It has to matter to everybody. And when we talk about mattering, it matters in terms of from a logical point of view as well as an emotional point of view. I must feel that I have a vested interest in this particular thing. All right, so I think most of us here understand this whole concept of process orientation, but it calls upon us doing a lot of reflection. We must start by asking the questions of why are we doing things this way and how can we be more effective? Critical questions that ask us to continuously look at the process that we're using and make improvements, making sure that we're not changing what is working, but we are tweaking and improving the way in which it's working. We are highly dependent upon cooperation and collaboration. Now, the opposition to that is really hard because a lot of people believe competition gives rise to the best. The reality is that in terms of research that actually is related to this, is that cooperation and collaboration gives rise to better decisions, whereas competitive situations give rise to possibly successful decisions, not superior. And superior in the context of better decisions for everyone, not just for one person. And this is the situation where in business, the businesses that succeed, the success is measured in terms of how much revenue or how much profit I was able to generate. But did it look at the cost from the perspective of how did society gain or lose? And a lot of these organizations, they make a lot of profits, but at a major cost to the population, to the world, to the environment. And that is part of the measuring process that now we have to look at because the standards are changing. All right. And cooperative approaches to finding solutions and making decisions give rise to better decisions that will impact upon everybody, including the wider environment, including climate conditions, including energy saving. Those are the kind of things that bring to bear better decisions because you're allowing for a cooperative approach where everybody is giving an input. And this is why being inclusive is important and empowering people to voice their opinions and to bring their concerns to the forefront without, as a leader, shooting them down. All right, which is something that we're not seeing in the international environment now. We have leaders outside there that don't want to hear descending or any form of voice that says something different to what you believe. That is not a movement forward because here it is, you're encouraging people to just only follow the people who they consider winners and that type of nonsense that's going on there. And I will call it as it is. It's nonsense. all right? Because all you're concerned about is your position and the position of a few individuals in the world. You're not taking into consideration what your activities and behaviors are having on the rest of the environment around you. Very myopic view of things leads to lots of problems. Same thing when we use competition to make decisions. Cooperation leads to better decisions because we're taking into consideration all of the different elements that are likely to impact, and we're bringing in more perspectives to be able to make a final decision. All right. So the studies actually indicate that is usually the better system to work out. Competitive decision making is usually going to be the same thing like what we talked about with democratic decision making. The collaborative approaches kind of shy away from utilizing those systems that tend to exclude other people and marginalize them, and that's part of the whole problem, because the process marginalizes other people who are seen as less successful, and we don't encourage the input of people who are at more peripheral positions within the organization or in society to have a say in what's taking place in the overall society. So that's the nature that we want to try and help each other with. All right, another element or set of elements we need to talk about here is the element of meaning making. We talked about this. Here, it has to mean something from a logical position, as well as it has to mean something to in my spirit. I must have an emotional connection. That's the two areas of meaning making that we're talking about, and this is both for leaders and followers. It has to be logical, cognitive wise, to everybody. This is a good idea. That what we're doing is a good thing for the country. It's a good thing for the world. It's a good thing for all of us. And I have a feeling, an emotional connection. I have my spirit is moved by this movement, and I want to invest my time and my energy in this. So the two elements of meaning making is the what they're talking about in terms of this aspect of the process. The process helps to help develop that meaning making. It means that the logical approach to developing the concepts and ideas has an emotive content, because that then hammers down the willingness of people to want to participate in the activity altogether. All right, so that's one of the other elements that we have to deal with as well. Now, another set of elements that we have to deal with here as part of the process orientation is reflection and contemplation. We have to utilize and get used to utilizing reflection as a means of helping to create a better process for the organization, a better process. And leaders have to lead the way. We have to talk about what happened, and we have to not only focus on what went wrong, but also what went right. Because far too often we tend to be negative in our focus. Because if we are meaning to repeat the process, we have to understand what we got right and what we got wrong to ensure that we continue doing what is right, tweak it to improve it, and correct what we did wrong. And that level of reflection and contemplation requires time. And the problem with a lot of organizations is that the speed of business and the speed of operation often negates this process. And leaders have to not find time, but they have to put time aside for this, because this is a very important part of the process that that the model requires. All right. If we are always going to be caught up in the rush of what's taking place, we're not going to be able to make this type of reflections in a meaningful manner. And we can't only do it alone. We have to do it by ourselves, our personal reflection and contemplation. But we also have to bring the organization to also do it at all levels of the organization. That is going to be something that is has to be drilled in and in itself become a process that is sort of built into the system, that we always review what we did, why we did it, and, that, and look at the outcomes, make the tweaks, make the improvements. This is important for us to do, to be able to make meaningful changes in both ourselves. I mean, consider, for example, when's the last time you really reflected upon how you did in your previous, either in your previous set of qualifications in secondary school, or your previous semester set of work? Have you had the time to reflect on what you did right and wrong? I mean, most people tend to use the New Year's and or their birthdays to actually do that kind of reflection. But this is something that we ought to be engaging in on a regular basis all the time, end of the week, end of the day. Um, and a place I like to do it is on the toilet, you know, do some reflection there instead of playing with the phone and things like that. All right, so we understand all of these types of activities that are process oriented that have to be built into the entire model that we're trying to develop here. So the whole relational leadership model is process oriented, and that process leads us into completing all aspects of the model, the other four areas, and continuing that whole situation where we are able to make improvements, be more inclusive, be more empowering, correct mistakes we made in the past, make sure our values are reflective of what's taking place around us. So it's an ongoing process that we need to be looking at all the time. Now, again, I don't need you to go and learn this or memorize it, but having these little diagrams usually would help a little bit in terms of it. Pay attention to the diagrams because it kind of speaks to the whole thing. Now, there is a video that I would like to have utilized, but I don't think there's enough time for us at this point in time to do that. Um, as I said here, it's another long presentation because the relational leadership model is presented in the chapter in a massive amount of detail. It gives countless examples of the things that it tries to explain because it wants you to understand. The chapter is really designed for you to try and understand this whole concept really well. The rest of the book is going to help develop the other aspects. I kept on pointing to the different things that they're looking at. And different chapters will focus on one or two of the elements and work them through to try and develop the skills that and those are the things that you all are going to be doing, the more nuts and bolts areas. Okay, all right. So the item I wanted to the video that I have here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to post this into your WhatsApp chat group so that you all could go look at it on your own time because I don't want to. Yes, this is our class. Okay, Leandro said that she can't make it. So this is the all right. This is the RLM model review. So you guys can have a look at that. It'll have to um, kind of give you a chance to look at things. All right. Anybody has any questions they would like to ask at this point in time?
No, sir, I have no questions.
All right. Everybody thinks they kind of follow what's going on across the board.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm. All right. I know it's a lot. I know we're 1 minute away from where class is supposed to end. But what I'd like you to do is look at that video because it does a really quick review. Don't look at it now because you're probably going to be exhausted. Take a look at it later on. If you want to go to the textbook, have a look at the chapter, or the PowerPoint is actually on the e-classroom. You could download and have a look at it as well. All right, guys. If there are no questions, I'd like to thank you all for coming out tonight. Next week, we look forward to the first set of presentations from our student bodies. I hope, Daniel, just keep me in the loop as to what's happening with your group, please, so I can advise you as to what to do. Okay?
So
Um,
actually, she sent me an email
good,
while
good.
back.
So I,
All right.
I got a
All right. So let's hope that leads us into a more productive approach to things. All right. So I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight and listening to a fairly long process of understanding the model. And I hope we've all gained from it. So good night, guys, and thank you for coming.
Yeah, good night,
good
sir.
Good
night,
night,
sir.
sir.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye, guys.